You're all very welcome to this online event here to launch the books on the history of the half barony of Mycarn, which is Moore and Crea. The books have been a long time in the writing, but my role here tonight, I'll just introduce myself and who we have here. For those who don't know, online that is, I'm Pádraig Kilduff, and we have Dr. Christy Caniff here who will launch the books, and to my right we have Sandra Kilduff, who also co-wrote the book. And at this stage now I shall hand over to Dr. Christy Caniff to get proceedings underway. Thank you very much.
First of all, I just want to say that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here tonight. And I'm also very happy to meet a lot of people that I know. Some people that I've worked with in the past, some people that I know through the heritage side of things, people that are involved with all sorts of things, heritage, recording graveyards and all that sort of stuff. So it's great to be here, and it's absolutely wonderful to be here with Sandra and Pádraig, because I know that this was a long journey for you. As you've said in your own blurb on the Facebook site, as a matter of fact, they contradicted one another, which is interesting. This probably happened during the last 5 or 6 years, because Pádraig said this is the culmination of 5 years, and Sandra said 6 years. So I'd say why this book, or these 2 volumes, this gigantic book was being written, I said there was a lot of times when you differed on words and your approaches to this. But if you did, I can assure you that you came up with an absolutely wonderful volume, or double volume. Now, I just have a few words here that I want to read through, because it'll keep me on track. I tend to wander a little bit. First of all, I suppose, after looking through the book, I can't say that I have actually read the book, or read the 2 volumes, because I only have them in my hand for a little over a week, and there's no way that I could possibly have read through these in that length of time. There's just so much material in them. But the first thing that I thought about was the amazing amount of content that's in this book. Just how much stuff is covered in it. How much history there is here, and how much architecture, and we'll say that whole background to the 2 parishes, the parishes of Moore and Crea. You know, as somebody delving in history myself, I have an appreciation of it, and I know a certain amount about it, but only when I started to look at this that I really realised that there's something huge in this. And I just say here that the parable that refers to one hiding their light under a bushel comes to mind, and could be suitably used to describe the parishes of Moore and Crea. This book, comprising of 2 volumes, has surely not alone lifted that bushel, but shone a spotlight on a highly important place with an interesting and significant story to tell. This is generally only when someone takes the time to research and publish a community's history that we begin to recognise the richnesses of our own place. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I think when people within the local parish reads this book, they're going to realise that there's a huge wealth and richness of history and heritage here in the barony, or the half barony of Moycarn. It's quite staggering. This story is told by the authors Sandra and Pádraig Kilduff in a very professional and easily accessible manner for all to read. And of course the reason for this is due to the meticulous and painstaking research and editing of this 2-volume masterpiece by the authors. With just short of 1,000 pages. That's a phenomenal size when you think about a book. Then you can see why you broke it into 2 volumes. And I know that there's more to come. So, you know, it's very interesting. This is a large body of work by anyone's reckoning. However, the clever way in which it's broken into smaller chapters makes it very easy to read. One can read through from cover to cover, which is the hardest thing to do in any book, or dip in and out. And I think that's what's wonderful here. The various chapters allow you to go into things or topics that you might be your choice of reading, and then it allows you to go back and read something else. So I think it's a very clever way of being able to tackle all of these, because I'd say you struggle at one stage wondering how do we mix all these different headings and topics together. And that really is a model for anybody that wants to approach a parish history. I'll be cogging some of this myself. I won't plagiarise. I'll use it as a model. So I'm delighted with that. There are 12 chapters in Volume 1 and 14 chapters in Volume 2. So that's a lot as far as chapters are concerned. Plus appendices. So that's where you put the bits and pieces that you can't fit in comfortably into a chapter, or a body of work that you just want to get put in there as well for somebody to be able to read. Endnotes, bibliography, and index. And if I may, I'm going to read through the list of chapters, just to give you a feel for it. Some of you have already managed to have a copy in your hands, those that were here early. And for those that are at home, or those that are elsewhere, wherever it might be, overseas, if you like, the diaspora, or the different people that are connected to the parish. First of all, in Volume 1, Moore and Crea, a history of the half-barony of Moycarn from earliest times to the early 20th century. The first chapter here is mythology and legend. And I think that's an interesting chapter, because it deals with a lot of things that, you know, the whole foundation of a place, and that's very, very important. And I suppose one of the elements that I love in there is the whole story with the Snog swim two boards. Now, I won't go into it in detail for the simple reason that I'm no longer to remember half of that stuff. But the one lady that I'm really intrigued with is this Princess Ishtu. She was an amazing lady. She happened to set two, well, maybe not two, certainly one, or maybe two men's hearts aflutter, and a flutter in many ways, because, and with every good book as well, you should have a little bit of, there should be a little bit of love in it, there should be a little bit of intrigue, and a few murders thrown in, and, you know, a few people getting maybe hung for what they did in that. Well, I can assure you, everything is in here and that. This is what bounces with this book. There's every aspect of life covered in this. But our friend Princess Ishtu is a very interesting lady, because we find that there was a sort of a tryst going on in the background there. This comes from the Dinchannings. It comes from the old naming of places. The material that was handed down in lore, that was written down eventually in the medieval period. And it talks about this lady and her husband, and how he suspected that there was something going on in the background. And she used to meet these two characters occasionally. But how they did it was actually quite interesting, because it was when they could shape change. And they used to turn themselves into swans that meet. Ishtu and her lover could meet as swans. Of course, the husband got jealous of this, and he had her male consort shot down. And what happens then is that he actually gets lost. His body floats down the Shannon. One of the brothers lands at Lone, and the other ends up down the Shannon. Princess Ishtu ends up down in a place called Micetown today for mussels. We all know where Micetown is. Well, we don't think about that as in a story like this, but this is where she dies with a broken heart, crying over the body of her lost lover. So these stories are all in here. So this is what's so interesting about this. It's taking us back to those legends and stories that makes a place, and it's all about the naming and that of places, the coming of Christianity, and of course. When you look at the parish, you have numerous sites here. Clonburn itself, a very, very important site. And I think that, even here, when you look at that, you talk about the fact that it was probably there prior to Clonmacnoise. That the fact that it was an important site prior to Clonmacnoise, that it's across the Shannon. You've dealt with the archaeology in it, which is interesting. You have dealt with the early Christian cross labs, which the cross of Carpery Crone that's there, and with the whole settlement, and putting it into its context and place. And I think that's very important, because it actually covers both archaeology and history, and that's the whole story of that site. I'm not going to have something to say about every one of these. Don't worry, we'll get out of here at some stage tonight, because the important thing here at the end of the night is that I actually launched this, and that you people and the people out there that are going to watch this on YouTube or whatever will get to put their hands in their pocket and buy themselves a present for Christmas. That's very important. Carrick Derrigan and the Nunnery of Clonburn. Well, that's the lady whose name I was trying to remember. She's an amazing character, because she's there. She herself is of princely class. She's the daughter of a king, and that's interesting, because here you have this lady of noble birth setting up a small monastery on the banks of the Shannon in Clonburn. A monastery that stands the test of time, and actually gives its name to the townland and that half of the parish. And she's the lady who we believe was there prior to our friend St. Kieran across the river. She's of noble birth. Kieran gets mentioned in this as well. He's treated up with feelings of slightly lesser birth. He's like a lot of us here. He was the son of a sayer. He was Kieran McIntyre. He was the son of a carpenter or a wheelwright. So but there was nothing wrong with that. He did all right for himself, as we'll see. The coming of the Normans. When I was growing up at home in Clonfert, one of my neighbours was Maggie Kinsella, or as we'd say, Kunchela, or Kunchel. Kinsella. This is the way the name is worked out. Maggie Margaret Corcoran. She was married to Penny Corcoran. And she was always telling us about the moat. So when I got older and got a way of travelling and all that, the one thing I wanted to see is this moat in Clonberne. You know, it's amazing. So there's a lot of links with people back and forward. There's a very close alliance between the people, the other side of the Suck and this side of the Suck, intermarriage and all different sort of things. And as you'll see when you look down to this, also a little bit of, you know, underhand tactics at times as well. Lots of things are happening around our area that were being influenced and being driven from this side of the Suck. But anyway, that's all here now, so we might get back to it someday and sort that out. The Tudor dynasty and the Reformation, a very difficult period, but of course, you know, this area has a long history. So all of that's dealt with. The era of Elizabeth I, the Brabazon dynasty and the Cromwellian era. Well, of course, the Brabazon, the famous Brabazon castle is where Hugh Dolan's house is in Ballinasloe. That's a fine castle of the period. An important piece of history, and of course they went on then to own territories in various places. And that's one of the things that comes out very strongly here, is the whole thing of land tenure, ownership, the various people, whether they were 16th, 17th century landowners, or they were the later 18th, 19th century landlords. So there's a lot covered here. The Battle of Aughrim, the penal laws. Again, the Battle of Aughrim, you know, because of the crossings here over the River Suck. And the Suck itself is dealt with in here as well. The Suck is so important to the whole telling of the story of this parish. And of our parish, the parish of Clonfert and those parishes across the river. So this is, I suppose, is the commonality between the different places that we're dealing with here. The St. George's, the Lynch family of Mycarn, and it was interesting there to read about our Lynch friend from Raharabeg, the fate that he suffered. So, you know, there's little things in here, there's gems in here about, you know, people's mishaps, people's hard times, what happened to them and that. And the Kellys of Woodmount, and then Ribbonism. And this is what I find, I'm actually working on Ribbonism at the moment myself. I'm actually looking at the Terrials. But this whole thing of Ribbonism, the Rockites, the Terrials, it's a quagmire. It's a very difficult bit of history. And if you're to read that, that's chapter 12. If you're to read that chapter, you'll actually think that they were setting out to annoy their neighbours in this. Because what you'll actually find here, and don't take this amiss because I'm near the door, I'm near enough to the door, I can see the thing behind me. But there was a lot of ribbon men around here. A lot of agrarian unrest around here. A lot of meetings, clandestine meetings. A lot of swearing in of people. And a few visits across the Suck, over to the Galway side. A few of our people suffered at the hands of a couple of characters here, but I think it happened the other way as well. But it's actually a great story to follow. But what you're going to find is to have actually named and shamed the people of the parish in this chapter. That's a terrible thing to do to your neighbours. But how they can qualify it is the Kilduffs were the worst of all. They don't know well in this at all, but they actually write about themselves. It's a good way of actually, it's a get-out clause. Everybody should have a skeleton recovered when they want to talk about others. But it's a fabulous story, and it's a great bit of intrigue. And I'll just go on. I just want to mention a few more from the other volume. But I'm looking forward. I haven't got the chance to read this yet. I'm actually looking forward to reading it from start to finish. Recreation, sports, all of that. The soldiers, actually, that's one of the. When you look at the soldiers and the stories of many of the people here that joined in the different armies and different wars through time, right through from the middle of the 18th century, right up until the early 20th century. There's sad stories there of men who went away, men who died. It doesn't matter what your political belief is in this. These were men who actually fought and died. Some fought for King glory. Some fought for the Irish state. The majority fought for a living and for a way of life. But their stories are told in here. The one thing that really got me here was the death penny. I'm trying to remember who that family was. I know them. Mullins. And Mrs. Mullins in Bannerhead, of course, that's the family. Yeah. But the death penny, and some of you might say, what's a death penny? The death penny is this big, it's like a medal or a coin that you received on the death of a son out on the Somme or someplace like that. Not a lot of use to a mother, Okay, she got her pension, but that's not a little good either. You know what I mean? She has lost her son, and several people in here have lost more than one. You know, it's a terrible time in our history, but it was something that we're all part of, and that's told very well here, and I think it's a very important thing to cover. Education in Moore and Korea, touching on the schools and the different things here. The famine was a crucial time in all of these communities, and people don't realise just how much the famine struck or how much the famine hit. A lot of communities tend to say, but sure, the famine really didn't affect us here. It's only when you sit down and write a history like this, and that you awaken thoughts and that you realise that it's far greater than people think. It affected people in all sorts of ways, and the same famine then fed into the likes of the workhouse, which you discussed as well in Ballinasloe. It fed into the graveyards here, because the graveyards were filled with the dying and that. The memories that some of the people still have of that period. So that's a very important aspect of the book as well. The Suck and Shannon River Drainage. I'm looking forward to reading this because I actually want to copy material on this. But I will credit in fairness now. I think there's a wonderful story there in the whole thing, right from the 1830s, 40s, right through until the 1980s when they were taking the forwards out of the Suck here itself. Daniel Desmond and passenger travel, the Connacht District Lunatic Asylum, a very important building, but something that has a hard history, but also gives great employment to people in these areas. So it works in a few different ways, if you like, when you look at something like that. William Cotter Kyle and William Blacker Kyle, the Thorngate and Churchill families, like the families, this is what's important here, that there are stories told here of big families and of small families. It's an interesting way. B.M. Tabachu, Reverend William J. Forden and Canon Robert Rowe. I actually haven't read those chapters yet, so I'm only giving you the headings of the chapters there. Dr. John Derry, Dr. McHale, and the Church of Mike Carn. Well, Dr. Derry was an amazing man, as was his brother. His brother was a priest in Airport, William Derry, and of course the Cochrans, who lived down at the other end of the Suck, who were linked with Ballinasloe and different places. They were related to the Derrys, and they themselves became priests. But McHale, Dr. McHale, he was a tough man. And you know, you'll see that in the history here. He was a great man and was a strict person, very, very strict person. And then finally, footprints, part one. Some who left and others who returned. And there's some lovely stories there. I was reading through that. They're very personal histories, and they're very personal to the families here. But what's also interesting with those sort of stories is those stories are actually part of our greater diaspora. They're hugely important. They link in very much with what you're doing here yourself, recording your graveyards and things, where you're actually reaching out and giving back history to the people from this community and the wider communities that have left the place. So, very, very important. And the one thing that I want to just touch on again is the fact that this book is fully noted. In other words, it has endnotes. Some people reading histories don't like footnotes or endnotes. Very important, because what that does, it means that your book, when you publish a book and it's properly cited, and other scholars are properly quoted in it, that book will go into the realm. Not alone is it a local history for local people, but it's actually a local history of an area that will be respected and used by other scholars. And that's what lifts a history above an ordinary simple parish history. So this book is fully referenced, a very, very important thing. A lot of people leave it out because they think, people won't buy it because of that. They will. It doesn't affect it. The way it's done, endnotes don't really affect the text. And of course, the other thing is the indexing. I love, the first thing I do when I'm buying a book, and I have bought too many books. My wife will attest to that, and I bought a few books last Sunday in Charlie Burns. To come home to find that I have twins, and that happens regular, or sometimes I have triplets. So I tend to buy books and don't look. And that's, but the first thing I do when I want to pick up a book is I go back to the index. I see, is there anything in there, first of all, that's going to interest me? But the title will interest me. And local history will always interest me. I like local histories. But I'll go back to the back and I'll just look to see what's mentioned. I'll just see his Clonfert mentioned in here. I think it is. Well, I got hard fight. I think I got it. Actually, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It is in here. I know it is. But these are the sort of things that you will do. But it allows you to go back in and find stuff. And that's shocking important. For the sake of that extra half hour, an extra week, 3 weeks. It's the worst part of the book, because you can make mistakes, or something can happen where you have to add in of it. The next thing, everything is out of kilter. People don't realise it. As a matter of fact, what a lot of people do is to pay professional indexers to do this bit. But the hard way about it, and did it yourselves, and fair dues for doing that, because it is well done. It is very, very important. I'm probably going to repeat myself a little. Now I'm going back to my text. This is a very professional publication in every sense. This is fully referenced with information cited in a manner that makes this the type of history that will sit comfortably on the shelf of a casual reader as that of a professional historian. Both are equally valid uses, and I am certain that it will be attractive to both. I would like to say once again that this is a professional body of work with great attention to detail and accuracy. The authors, Sandra and Patrick Porrick-Kilduff, are both historians. Sandra with an MA in medieval studies, thus why you see such detailed page to all of that medieval material and prehistoric material that's in there in the book, and Porrick with an MA in history. So they're both professional historians who know how to approach history and how to write history. And that will stand the test, and that will stand the test for the parishes here as well. It actually gives these histories a great imprimatur going out. You know that they're professionally written in every sense. The 2 volumes look great. I already mentioned that the typesetting was done by Porrick. I have a funny feeling that he didn't do it on his own, but he said he did, so I have to take his word for it. And I'm sure you're not going to argue over it. Look at the camera. No, that's good. That's important. The printing, and I'm saying both arduous tasks, both indexing and typesetting. The printing was done by Speciality Printing, Ballymount, Dublin. And the book is superb. It looks absolutely wonderful. The cover looks wonderful. Everything about it, the size, the feel of the book. People that like books, almost, they nearly smell the books from the Bible. I mean, you know, there's a love affair with books for book buyers. And there's an awful lot in how the book feels, the weight of the book when you pick it up. These are absolutely wonderful books. Everything about them, the way you feel them, the way you open them and that. And they're very well put together. One of the problems with a lot of books is that they fall apart. These are quality books. And I say well done to the staff there. This is the staff of Speciality Printing. They did a great job there. This is a book that every household in the 2 parishes and the wider region in general needs to acquire. So I'm making a bold statement here. Every household here needs to acquire those 2 volumes. It will not be alone, not alone be a keepsake, but a major resource for historians and academics studying South West Common and rural Ireland in general into the future. It will disappear off the shelves very fast. And I would urge people to make sure to get copies, because sometimes you can be so exhausted that when you do a second run, that can take a little while. And people then get very disappointed because I meant to get it. It's too late if you're meant to get it. My motto always with books is that you buy a copy to use, and then you buy a copy for yourself. Now that doesn't make much sense, and I've said this before, and people have said to me, my wife has said, what sense does that make? That's how you make an excuse to get 2 copies of everything. But what it actually means, if you're going to use a book and you're going to have it kicking about, well, that'll be your working copy. But then, because you know that book is precious, have the second copy. But the great thing about this, it's coming out at a time just before Christmas. What have we left? 2 weeks. They're about to Christmas. Wouldn't that be, well, wouldn't that be a lovely present to give to somebody that you like? If you don't like them, send them on the link for the video. But if you do, send them on the books. They'll really enjoy them and they'll love them. Get it out to your friends and relations abroad and promote it among the wider West Common diaspora. The book alone, in some of the discussion that we saw there in some of the chapters, tells us about the people that left this parish. And I'm sure that the families here are still in contact with some of those families, and now with social media and all sorts of things, it's going to be possible to promote that right back into the kitchens or the sitting rooms of those people. So that needs to happen, to make sure that they have access to this as well. I wish to congratulate the authors, Sandra and Porrick-Kilduff, and the Moore History Group on such a fine publication, and wish them the very best in the future. Tonight is a significant moment in time for the community. Sadly, due to COVID, this event has to be curtailed to an online event, but that will make a chapter in someone else's book in 100 years' time. So everything that occurs is a moment in history. The fact that we're here tonight launching two wonderful books in front of the camera is a chapter for somebody's book. But that's not going into the third volume, though. This is too soon. Finally, I would like to say congratulations to all of in this great project, especially to Zandra and Pádraig Kilduff. This is a great achievement. And I would like to thank them sincerely for providing me with the honour of launching this wonderful book. It is an honour to be asked to launch a book. And it's a double honour to be asked to launch a two-volume book. But it is a great honour to be asked to launch a book. It means that somebody is trusting 6 years of work in you doing a half-useful job in what you're doing up here. Whether you are or not, I know if they're talking to me next week, but anyway, I have been chuffed over it. And of course, the great thing that happens when you launch a book is that you end up with signed copies, and signed copies are absolutely wonderful. Some people say that once you sign them, they lose their value. Once you get a book signed by the authors, it gains value, because now it's something that's personal to you. It's a relationship between you and the authors, and it's a very, very important thing. So to finish off, I would like to say that this two-volume book entitled Moore and Creagh, A History of the Half-Barony of Mike Carron from earliest times to the early 20th century, is now, I hope, officially launched. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Christy, for that illumination address. I don't know what I can say to follow that, but I just have a few words to keep myself on track here. And it's always better, I think, to have a few words written down. And for us, these books on Moore and Creagh and the Half-Barony and Mike Carron, as we say, it had been I'm going to say nearly 6 years. That way I cut the difference. And in the making of that research, editing and bringing to the printed page. And as chairperson of the Moore History Group, I would like to thank the Moore History Group and Roscommon County Council for their support in bringing this work to the printed page. Now the books, they were originally meant to cover just those years after 1852. Some people will be aware of that. When the St George family put their estate in Moore for sale in the Encumbered Estates Court. But of course, like all things, it grew, the project grew. And especially in the last 2 years, as we have those I call them very strange 2 years, it meant that while others were out making use of that time, decorating their houses and all that, and having, making good use of that time in that way, we decided to become like virtual hermits and just stick into the computers and the laptops and into the research and work on really digging deep into the history of the Half-Barony. So it was really a positive experience for us in that sense. So of course, history of course is who we are and where we come from and where we live. So, and the built landscape that surrounds us and the shifting sands of the people who lived in that land, they impact on who we are today. Now, for me, of course, I was just thinking back on where it all began. And for me, the history of Moore was first introduced to me by stories that my father would have told me as I grew up in the town of Ballinasloe, where I would have been, of course, very much a Galway supporter, although the house was painted in the Roscommon colours, in blue and yellow. It had to be done. Both my parents had their roots in Moore, and of course visits to the family graves in Kilbegley there, where you have the gravestones going back to the early 1700s. Of course, that all, impacted on kind of my knowledge of the history of, say, my own family, as well as kind of the history of the area. And we had, for me, it was childhood summer spent in my father's house where he grew up, and my aunt and uncle. And also my mother would organise day trips We didn't have a car at the time, so she would organise and get a day trip, and we go off to some big house like Lissadell or Clonallis or Tullinally, and I think it was a wonderful experience to see those big landed estates houses. And of course, the house, like I say, belonged to my father. It was one of those last batch of houses in South Roscommon that was electrified. So for me, coming from the town as a little lad, and we spent something like 2 summers out there, it was a great experience. I thought it was marvellous, you know, coming from everything inside to what you had there. You'd have, it was really kind of the totally unchanged from the late 19th century. You'd have the, as we all, some of us would be aware of, going to the well for water, you know, the skillet pot over the fire, and the oil lamp hanging on the wall. So it was all that kind of, it all kind of fed into my love of history and sparked it. So, and of course, like I say, I was just looking at, when you, looking at the 2 books, I mean, I won't go into back over what Christy has said. I think he made a wonderful launch there and wonderful speech on the books. But just looking at the little piece on the back of the books, I think it kind of says it in itself. You have the first volume. It takes up through those legendary heroes like the headless Carby Crumb and the female Saint Carrick-Durden, and those who fought for their religious beliefs in the penal eras, and the nuns of the Priory of Dromalga. And of course we have all the other great landed estate families that were in the area as well. And of course, like you mentioned, the Ribbonmen, that was an interesting chapter. Yes, very interesting, because I have to say, yes, we have relations that were very deeply involved in Ribbonism in this area. Some are name by name, others are, I know who they are, put it that way. Yeah, I'm not going to say it tonight, but they are there. And the Ribbonmen, of course, they reacted with violence, and landlords, they of course fought duels, you know, the famous duel of the Kellys and the Lynches. So really it's a case of, we have murder, mayhem, romance and politics, and the struggle of the landlord and tenant, rich and poor, in the lush farmlands along the bogs and callows fed by the waters of the Suck and the Shannon, and of course that area of South Roscommon on the great ancient route way across Ireland. And that is, like what it is, it's a very, very important area in the history of Ireland. We know it's the parish of Moore is an island parish, but in the half barony, you know, that whole area, it has so much history. And the second volume there, you can see where, as we say, we went through all of the sports and the horse race and all the trouble that could arise from day at the races, and also on those kind of wild and happy times we have the sadder, darker days of the workhouse and the asylum, and of course the deadly effects of the famine, where disease and eviction, they all played their part. So as we were talking there about all those who served in the British Army in the various parts around the world, I mean, they served from Canada to Australia, quite apart from locally, just even up in Crinkle or in Shannonbridge. So, you know, they were part of this landscape that we all inhabit. And then we have the rise in education, which was hand in hand with that. You have the tide of immigration, where an awful lot of people were actually educated just to go and leave to find a better life somewhere else. And unfortunately, like I say, for some it was a two-way trip, as we mentioned there about at the end, the footprints section, because some emigrated, but also a lot returned as well. We don't ever think about that. We think of it, it's all kind of one way, leaving the country. But tonight I know we have people here who wouldn't be here if their great-grandfather hadn't returned from America. You know, we just don't think of that. And like I said, they all came back and they breathed a new life into that ancient landscape. And just to sum up really, I mean, what I can say is those books, they were a pleasure to research. I mean, that is as anyone knows who is into history, the biggest fun is in the research, because you suddenly reach out into the past and you bring something to life. You know, somebody that's long forgotten, or an episode in history that's long forgotten, and suddenly you're there and you bring it back into the present. You know, and I mean that's putting it there for the future generations. You know, and for not alone us here tonight and online, but it's there for all those upcoming generations that will see those books and read about their past. And I hope you all enjoy it. That's what I can say. Thank you.
What can I add to these two brilliant men who have praised the work, who have illuminated this book launch with their wonderful ideas? How did I come to be here? What was the road that brought me here? The road that brought me here started as a child in my father's workshop. My father was a merchant tailor, and his friends included Tyke McLaughlin, the great folklorist, Father Egan, the Ballinasloe historian. And I listened to people like them, and Monsignor Page, who was the expert on the Woodford evictions. When I came to Moore, I started to write short stories again, and I was the sort of person who more or less stood back. I didn't mix that much, I didn't know many people. My dearest friends were in Ballinasloe. I found it difficult to localise until I realised one thing: you can live anywhere, but you can be yourself everywhere. I joined the history group and became interested in Moore. I was always interested in Cree and Ballinasloe. I became interested in Moore. I was fascinated because I once read that somebody had been asked to write a history way, way back, and they said there's no history in Moore. There is a wealth of history in Moore. We haven't touched the top of the iceberg with these books. The third book, which is already written, is the book that I think myself is my favourite outside of the early medieval. Potts, Mathers, agrarian troubles, and a flotilla of very interesting local characters, local people, real people. This is not fiction. This is fact. These books are fact. They're your people, your ancestors. Most of the people here in this room tonight have had a link back into your past that you might not know about, or you might know about. Some of you have given us wonderful, wonderful stories, and we are very, very thankful. I cannot thank some people in this room enough for bringing these books, as much as we have, into the public eye. There's a lot in writing a book, a lot in researching, but there's also the emotional trauma behind the fact that sometimes you feel, are these books going to make it into print? There are people in this room who made sure that that happened, and that was people involved in the Moore History Group. And I thank each and every one of them who supported us in every way, financially, emotionally, and with their research. People came forward to us and trusted us with their family photographs, their family stories, and we said, thank you. We hope we will be able to bring these into print. But because of the history group and some people here in this room who will scream at me if I name them, we can say thank you, because you have provided these books for the future children, the future researchers, and for people who just want to sit down and read. History is vitally important, because only by knowing our history will we be able to fight our future and to survive it. The people in 1918 with the Spanish lady who were dying of a flu they knew nothing about, if you read the section that I have written about that, you will see they wore their masks. They didn't know why. They just felt, I'll cover my face. This won't get me. The schools closed, the theatres closed, the churches closed. All of these things happened before. And we can look back and say, we will have the courage that these people had in 1918, 1919, 1920, before the disease died out. We will be no less people than them. We will have the courage to go forward in what we are going through right now, and we will see better days. We will see the Roaring Twenties as they did see the Roaring Twenties. They survived, we will survive. The lessons of history are there. I would like to say that the experience of writing these books was the most wonderful experience, and I have written books before, and I have written the history of St. Nathan's College before for the bicentenary. But there was a difference here. There was a difference that I could walk down to Clonberne and I could stand where Carrick Durgan had stood. I could walk to the spot where the cattle drives happened, where we as a history group performed the reenactments. I can stand in this hall and look at that stage, and I can see the characters that were real people in the Mather's play. And I can say to the Moore History Group and to the community in Moore, well done. You have all helped put these books on this table, and you will do it again with the third book. And with that, I say thank you very, very much.
Now I'll just wind up and say thank you very, very much for coming tonight to support us in this book launch, and thank Christy for his wonderful address at the launch of this book. Oh, my apologies. See, wife's giving me the nudge. So before I stop, I have to invite Sandra back up again, because a number of years ago she wrote a book of poetry. Well, one of them, two of them, but this one, and some of the poems in it were about Moore. Really long before she kind of had put down roots in the parish. So I'll let her off and let her say the poetry.
This is my Christmas gift to all of you, and to those of you watching. It's a poem that I wrote in 1997. It's a book that I donated to the St. Vincent de Paul in Moore. But this is special to me, very, very special, because I wrote this poem when I was very, very seriously ill with cancer. I didn't know whether I was going to survive or whether I was going to die. But I wrote the poetry. It's called Kilbegley Cemetery. On the windswept heights above the rolling fields, where newborn lambs with black faces bleat at milk-filled mothers, the daffodils wavering, spring bells in golden harmony, lighting up the pathway to the old monastery site. The wind howls mercilessly, raging through the high grass, and the Celtic cross rises out of the mist, monuments to a forgotten people. The old gate creaks, and the ash tree bows, as the unseen pilgrims move to and fro, remembering old times, old faces of long ago. The firelight, the stories, the house dances and the fairs, but now all is silent, except for the screams of the nesting crows and the whistle of the wind in the trees. A lone boy on a horse passes by, his mind on the point, and an old memory passes of funerals on wet days and people shaking hands, the crunch of the gravel, the slam of the gate, another soul gone to heaven, and reflections of past good in Millers of Ballydangan. He was a good soul, harmless and quiet. Aye, another place is filled, and another glass is empty. The daffodils are cold on the hill of Kilbegley, but the blue mist rising from the fields across the land, with a great silence, there is such peace as only the monks of old and the dead could ever know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, all I can say is thank you again for coming here tonight, and thank you for joining online. Thank you to Christy and to Sandra for the fun myself. Like I say, we enjoyed writing those volumes, and the third volume will be out in the spring, all going well. And just all I can say is I have to thank the Community Council Committee for allowing us here to use this hall. And all I can say at this stage is to wish you a very, very good Christmas. And like I say, Salmons in Ballinasloe, they will be the ones who will be dealing with the books and books online. So it's easy to find their site online to go on there and to purchase books. Or else, if you want to, just contact myself or Sandra directly. So, thank you very much.